begun our study on Revelation in our first session by looking at some of the features and patterns of the book. We'll do a little bit more of that as we get into this session, but I want to begin with another throwaway question so that we can just learn a little bit about you guys. If you had to choose right now, David,
you're going to start
James,
with these
Jeffrey,
again?
right now,
Okay.
if you had to choose right now to forfeit hearing or sight. Now, we want to be sensitive about this. We want to be sensitive because there are people who actually, by no choice of their own, don't have sight or hearing. This is not a light matter, but there's a point to this. If you had to choose one or the other, which would you retain?
Well,
Sight.
I'm losing my hearing anyway, so I guess sight.
Sight.
Sight? Sight? Really? All of you, sight?
Absolutely.
Retain hearing?
No hesitation.
Me too. But I've asked that question to other people, and everybody says, hearing, I'd rather retain sight.
No. That's what I meant. I'd rather retain sight.
Oh, you'd rather retain sight?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's what we all meant.
All of us meant that. I'm losing my hearing
Okay,
anyway.
so we're the opposite.
I'm losing my
We're
hearing
the
anyway.
opposite.
Yeah.
I would rather retain hearing.
You would.
Yeah, because think about it. Think about this for a minute. If you just close your eyes, everything that we're doing here would continue. We'd be having this conversation. Information would be coming in, processing, right? But if you couldn't hear, suddenly there would be a major problem with information processing. I mean,
I
you'd
can
get
read your
around
lips.
it,
I can
you'd
read your
deal with
lips.
it, you'd deal with it. What's that?
I can read your lips.
You could, you would master that. The book of Revelation has both sights and sounds.
Yeah.
The book of Revelation over and over again says, I saw, and over again it says, I heard, over and over again. When we look at the first prophecy in the book of Revelation, the 7 churches, over and over again for every one of the churches, there is this repeated refrain. And
The Spirit says,
yeah,
him that hears.
yeah. Listen to what the Spirit is
says.
saying. He that has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit is saying to the churches. The 7 churches prophecy in Revelation is a prophecy that has both a local historical application to the people of the time that John is writing to, but it also has a universal prophetic application. And I think it'd be great to just flesh out both of them. But before jumping right into that, what about the book of Revelation as a whole? There are different ways to approach the book of Revelation. There are different interpretive methods. What are some of those interpretive methods that are popular, that people use? I mean, it's a book that has a bunch of symbols and prophecies. So you come to the book, you have to have a methodology, a consistent method. What are some of the methods that people do use?
I wonder if one of the most popular ones, at least today, would be what they call futurism. That is to take the prophecies and to confine them at some mysterious point in the future.
Right. So all of it happens in a short space of time, relatively short space of time, but it's all in the future.
It's all in the future.
That's called futurism.
Futurism.
What?
Another one
And
is-
not just the future from our time, but obviously from John's time, that John was writing about, because he's writing 2,000 years ago from our time.
Okay.
He's writing about something that is well future. And the proponents of the futurist system believe that the events described here are yet future.
Right.
Yeah, that's right.
So,
Even
And
our
some
time.
of them are, but
certainly.
Yeah.
But the idea that all
All
of
of
them
them.
are, and I think the word you used was confined. That's a good word.
yeah.
That it's largely or almost entirely for some, future, relatively short period of time,
And,
etc.
and it's based on Revelation 4, where John is told to come up here, then I'll show you things that must be hereafter. So I would say futurists primarily start from chapter 4. The churches, they'll allow a little bit of wiggle room, but 4 and onward, I'll show you things that must be hereafter, is usually futurism. And then the opposite of that is preterism.
That's a big word. What does
Now,
that mean?
Preterism is completely the opposite of futurism in that it's, because pre is what comes before, so you've got everything being pushed to the past.
Pastism.
Usually, hey, that's a new word.
That's a better
Pastism.
word.
David, can you give us a little bit of background on pastism?
I like that. I'll take it.
Okay. Usually it's John's time and right in the Nero
The Roman
era.
Empire
The Roman
and so
Emperor, Nero was the Antichrist, etc. Right in that period of time, most of, if not all of the book of Revelation is past.
So one interpretive method is preterism. It all happened, all this stuff happened pretty much in the past. during the time of John. Futurism, it's all going to happen in a relatively short period of time in the future. Is there any other method?
Well, there is a school of thought called idealism that is basically the idea that Revelation is not dealing with specific times or events or history as such. It's dealing with big picture ideas.
Principles.
So there's
It's dealing
symbols
with-
of some
You've got
idea.
it, exactly right. The symbols of evil, the symbols of nations, etc. And that's this idea. And there's some truth to that in the sense that these are symbols of something. But
There's a
rather-
dragon in
You
the
got it.
text. but
Rather than
that's-
it just being a general symbol, though, I believe it's symbols of specific nations, not just principles in some general sense.
Okay. Any other methods?
There's a fourth method.
A fourth method?
Yeah, there's a fourth method, which we probably, all of us here probably think is the best, because it's based in the text. It's based in the introduction of the book of Revelation. The introduction of the book of Revelation, there are 3 verses actually that I think apply or support this interpretation.
What is it? What is this interpretation called? Does it have a name?
Yeah, it's called historicism.
Historicism. Okay.
And even though that sounds like it's putting everything in the past, like history, because history, we think of history as that which has happened, historicism actually allows for the prophecies to be past, present, and future. And it really actually
Moves through history.
Yeah, and it really actually it embraces all of the other ones that we've talked about. It embraces futurism, it embraces preterism, and it embraces idealism. It brings them all together.
So it avoids an overemphasis on one or the other.
Yes, perfect. And the text that it's based on now the main text it's based on, of course, is going to be verse 19. But building to verse 19, you have 2 other verses. The first one is verse 4 of Revelation, and it reads like this. John of the 7 churches which are in Asia, grace be unto you and peace from him which is, present tense, which was, past tense, and which is to come, and from the 7 spirits which are before his throne. So the idea here is that this is the revelation of Jesus Christ, who is God. This is the revelation from God, from Jesus. It's a revelation of him who is, who was, and is to come. Therefore, the revelation itself is going to be a revelation of things which are, which were, and which are to come.
Okay.
And you find this in the book of Revelation. For example, in this verse 7, it talks about Jesus coming, and it says, every eye shall see him, even those that pierced him. Well, by the time John is writing, that's already taken place. By the time John is writing, Jesus has been pierced. He's being shown something right here. Reference is being made to something right here. We get to Revelation 5, you've got the Lamb that was slain. It's in the midst of the throne. Well, the Lamb was slain way before John hit the Isle of Patmos. You get to Revelation 12, you've got the dragon that was in heaven, and he deceived 1/3 of the angels and cast it. Well, that didn't happen in John. That happened hundreds of years, thousands of years. That happened before creation or around that time. So a lot of the events that John has shown are, in a sense, a setup. They're past prophecy, past history that's setting up the scenario for his time and the scenario for the end of time.
The reason I like that approach the best is because it presents God as a God who has been involved in the affairs of humanity from beginning and will continue to be to the end. Whereas if we just parked in one of these other schools of thought or interpretations or methods, we would confine God's activity to the past. Yeah, but what
Or
has
the future.
Or the future, right? Or the future, right? And so it's almost as if these other approaches deny God's activity in the past and deny God's upcoming activity in the future, whereas historicism argues that no, God has been present and involved through the whole process.
I think it's
That's
more.
what I like.
I think I like that too. But I think it's more specific, isn't it? Because the book of Revelation, in verse 19, James, you mentioned verse 19, but didn't actually take us there. But in verse 19, John is told specifically by Jesus, write the things which you have seen, and the things which are, and the things which shall take place after this. So that verse is pretty explicit. Jesus is saying, the things I'm about to unfold to you are about things that are presently taking place in your time, John, right there, right in your time. And the things I'm going to be showing you are about things which are to take place after this. So what I meant when I said it's more specific, really the book of Revelation, as we begin to study it, we discover that it's dealing with a period of time from the time of John, what we might call the apostolic period.
First
from
century AD.
First century, the time of Christ, straight through things that will take place after this, straight through to the final and full establishment of the kingdom of God. New heavens, new earth. So that's the swath of time that we're dealing with in the book of Revelation. And there's another pattern. We've been mentioning patterns and traits. And what the pattern is that we didn't specifically name in the book of Revelation is that over and over again we see that John is following this particular historical trajectory. With the 7 churches, he begins with the church of Ephesus, which, if you look at the characteristics of the church, easily are identified as the apostolic period.
That is to say, the first century church.
The first century church. And then the 7 churches prophecy extends all the way to the 7th church, or the end time segment of human history, the time in which we live. But then it doesn't stop there. John then backs up, and there's the 7 seals prophecy. 7 churches, 7 seals. And that prophecy doesn't pick up with the end time period and extend from there. And it doesn't.
It recapitulates.
It
Overlaps,
recapitulates.
yeah.
It's a repeat and enlarged pattern. There's an actual intentional literary pattern. The 7 seals begin with the first century and extend to the end. Then again, 7 trumpets. Back up, repeating things that are taking place over the same swath of history. So the thing that's brilliant about the historicist method of interpretation is it accounts for John's time, it accounts for all the history that followed John's time, and it accounts for the time in which we live and yet future to us. It accounts for all of that time. So that's why I think all of us strongly favor the historicist method. It speaks very strongly.
Yeah, God is as if God wants to, like we've been saying, disclose his activity on earth. And he kind of makes himself almost predictable. So as we look at the way God has acted and intervened in history, we can sort of understand what he's up to today and what his plans are for tomorrow. So it's almost like he's making himself.
Tell me if you like this. On this note, I don't think this idea that God is largely confined either primarily to the past or largely primarily to the future, I don't think that's something that is exclusively the domain of prophecy. I think that we can fall into a very similar trap. So as to say, oh, the manna, oh, the walking on the water, oh, the parting of the Red Sea. God has worked. Or in the future, when God returns and he puts everything to rights and the world is, he will work. But the tricky part for us, isn't it, is, okay, but what's God doing
Now.
today?
Good point.
And there's a really cool story of this in the book of John chapter 11. John also wrote the book of Revelation, but in his gospel he tells this quick story that people might remember. And it's the story of the death of one of Jesus' friends, a guy named Lazarus. And Jesus hears that Lazarus is sick, and he purposefully delays. And he shows up not in time to save Lazarus from death. When he arrives, Lazarus has already died.
4 days
and
late.
Jesus' sister, Martha, comes out and sort of questions Jesus' timing and his judgment in coming so late. And in that interaction, it's fascinating. She says, Jesus, if you would have been here, he would not have died. Translation, you could have fixed this in the past. Jesus then says to her, your brother will rise again. To which she says, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day.
Okay.
Future.
She's done, contemporaneous with her, she's done what we do today. God has wrought, God has worked, God will work, but then what Jesus says is fascinating. He gives the present tense of these very significant words, hugely pregnant in Old and New Testaments. I am the resurrection and the life. It's not just that I have worked and not just that I will work, but I am working.
Yeah.
Right here, right now. And to me, that's always been really helpful to see that he's not just the God of history, preterism, if you will. He's not just the God of the future, futurism. Prophetically speaking, as well as in all aspects of God's interaction with human history, he is the God of history. He is working,
story,
he is moving through history and Revelation. We should not be surprised then that God is depicted in Revelation as moving through human history from the time of the prophet, in this case John, through the swath, as you say, of human history, down to the climax.
All right, you asked the question, tell me if you like this. That's what you said before you started.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So I'm telling you I like it. And the thing I like about it too is if you read these two verses in Revelation, before you get to 19, Revelation 1 verse 4, and then Revelation 1 verse 8. So 1 verse 4, when it describes God in these three dimensions, past, present, and future, it starts with, from him which is. From him which is.
Yeah, it starts with the present tense.
That's the emphasis.
Yeah, I am.
Yeah, then you look in Revelation chapter 1, verse 8, I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the ending, says the Lord, which is.
Yeah, who is, and then was, and
is
yeah,
to come.
I
Which
love
is,
that.
which is, which
Well,
is.
Moses is standing at the burning bush. Who shall I say sent me? I am. I am that I am. Present tense of the verb to be. So God is not only active in the past, He's not only going to be active in the future, but God is alive. He's not an idea. He's not a philosophy. He's not a concept.
And that makes
He's
a huge
alive.
difference to John because he's on the Isle of Patmos.
Absolutely.
He's basically in Alcatraz. He's basically been abandoned.
He needs hope.
And
Last living
there
apostle.
comes Jesus right now, right there in the present.
But isn't it true though that I think that sounds like a really good idea. It appeals to my intellect, but is that real? Is that happening?
You lost me there. Is what happening?
You're saying that it's not just that God is acting in the past, mentioning things like the Red Sea. We might mention, Peter walking on water. I think you mentioned Lazarus raised from the dead. The future, we know that crazy, wonderful things are going to take place. But right now, I think some people. I had somebody say to me not long ago, there's no proof that your Christian view is true right this moment.
And I think
you can point to things written in a book that happened in the past. You can point to things that you say are going to happen in the future, but none of the stuff that the record of your holy book says happened in the past are happening right now. So it sounds it sounds like fiction.
I think that's why it's important to understand what God has done in the past. An individual would not even know what to look for. Like, what do you look for? When somebody poses that question, yeah, but what is God doing now? Where is God? I haven't seen him working. You would ask, well, what are you looking for? Like, are you looking for God walking down the street, on the corner, crossing the street? What are you looking for? So how do we know what we're looking for?
Yeah.
That's a great way to
The
say
way
it.
we know what we're looking for is by understanding God being identified in the past. And that gives us a clue on what God is doing in the present. I think that's why the past is so critical.
Yeah.
And something I want to add to that, I cited miraculous things from the past and miraculous things that will yet happen in the future. But God works in ways that can be quite normal. I mean, he does that. We see, for example, Jesus comes down to earth. He's a human. He's just sort of walking around. He's talking to people. He's having a conversation with the woman at the well. He's having dinner at Zacchaeus' house. Not everything that God does is fantastical. He's not a magician. He's not pulling rabbits out of the hat. Hey, look at this card trick. And too often, I think, when we're looking, and I love your point there, Jeffrey, when we're looking for what God is doing, we're looking for the fantastical, for the sensational, for the amazing. And God does do that, incidentally. God can work in really powerful, miraculous ways, even in the present tense.
Yeah.
But a lot of the ways that God works is like a sunset, the birth of your first child, a beautiful symphony.
yeah.
You're like, man, God is alive.
one of the ways, the reason I really was feeling the weight of that question when somebody brought it to me is because for me, actually, and I don't know why this is, I'm not as impressed when I read about the miracles in the Bible or hear about the miracles of the past. What I think is incredible, and you happen to mention one of them, is the conversation that Jesus had with the woman at the well, or the interaction Jesus had with Nicodemus, and the information, the light, the perspective that emerged.
You're onto it.
That is of far more significance than
Pulling a rabbit out of a hat.
Pulling a rabbit out of a hat, doing a miracle. Not that miracles aren't incredible and amazing, but the seven churches. There's nothing.
Pastoral
This is
insight.
pastoral. This is Jesus interacting with us on the level of our thoughts and our feelings and our moral existence. He's saying, these are the things that are wrong with the way you're relating to me and others, and these are the things that need to be corrected. These are the good things. I'm going to affirm the good things that are happening, and these are the kinds of things that I would like to see happen. And I promise you, if you follow through with this, there's going to be incredible things that are coming your way. That's all pastoral. There are no miracles. It's And for me, the best experiences I've ever had, quote unquote, with God,
were not miraculous in nature.
no, they were me realizing something.
100%.
Realizing something.
Same here.
Realizing a relationship has a quality to it that I need to nurture. Realizing that somebody to my left or to my right is falling apart at the seams, and I feel prompted to speak words that will lift them out of that darkness, hopefully. Realizing an insight or a perspective that opens God's character to me more clearly, so I think, wow, God is more beautiful than I've ever imagined, and there's the testimony, or what the Bible calls the witness, in my spirit that God is.
Yes, sir.
It's there.
Yes,
I
sir.
know. Someone can say to you, I can prove to you scientifically God doesn't exist. And I would immediately turn back and say, I can't prove to you that he does, but I know that he does. You hear what the difference? I can't prove to you that God exists, but I can tell you that I personally know God exists because of the things I see in my mind.
You know, Ty, you're right on track
And
with
the
this.
experiences that you've had with him.
And what's amazing to me is that the 7 churches specifically perfectly line up with the illustrations you've given, especially the illustration of the woman at the well. Because when you look at the woman at the well, you're looking at a woman who is broken. You're looking at a woman who's coming to the well at a time of day when no one else is going to be there for a specific reason. That Jesus actually flushes out. She has had 5 husbands, and the guy she's living with right now isn't even her husband. She doesn't want to be seen. She doesn't want to be known. She doesn't want to be identified by any of the townspeople. And here comes Messiah, and he's coming to the place where she is. He knows her brokenness.
I like that.
He knows her history. He knows everything about her, and he loves her. And not only so, but the way he comes across to her causes her to get so excited about all the bad things she ever did that she's willing to run into town and tell everyone that this is the Messiah based upon the fact of my terrible history that he just revealed to me. That's the picture of the 7 churches.
There's no, I guess the only, anyway, I didn't want to cut you off
This is the picture of the 7 churches. The 7 churches is a picture of these churches that have all of these different issues, this history, these weaknesses, these faults. The last church is so bad that God just wants to throw up. You just make me sick. You just want me. I just feel like puking.
But I love you, and here are some promises.
And yet,
I'm glad you added that part, because I was just like...
And yet Jesus is coming, and he's revealing himself before he even gives the... He's in the midst of the churches. Not just 2 of them, but all 7 of them. And so you see Christ in the midst of the churches, just like you saw him going to the Samaritan woman, just like you see him going to Nicodemus, that self-righteous legalist, just like you see him hanging out with the disciples and leading them after they've denied him, leading them forth to Galilee. Just the picture, the relational picture, is what the book... Revelation is not just prophecy, it's this relational picture.
It's a poem and a prophecy and a pastoral letter. Let me just say something. You go ahead first.
No, I have to take a break. You take us
very,
out.
very quickly, I love your point there about the woman at the well, how he comes and he's with her. And in each church, to each of the 7 churches, Jesus says, I know.
I know. That's right.
I know. I know. I know. I know. And the love of God is greater than his knowledge of our, not that it's greater, but the knowledge of our weaknesses, our failures, our faults and foibles. God's like, hey, I know about that.
It's swallowed up.
And you've had 7 husbands. I know about that. And I know. And at the end of the day, you've got this text here right at the outset, verse 5, back to Revelation 1, verse 5. To him who loved us and washed us from our sins in his own blood. And I love to make a point here about the order there, the chronology. It's who loved and washed. But we often think about God in the reverse of that. Man, I hope I can get cleaned up so that I could be worthy of God's love and his affection. But no, who loved us, who I know. Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know.
And I still love you.
I love you. Now let's
clean it up.
Let's clean that up.
Yeah. So let's take a break on that note. That's the gospel right there.
Amen, brother.
Amen.
Want a seat at the table? Well, you're certainly invited. Visit our website at lightbearers.org. In fact, you may want to make it your homepage, because we're always adding something new to strengthen your relationship with Jesus. At lightbearers.org, you'll find thought-provoking blogs and verse-by-verse Bible studies on a variety of vital topics. Our online resource center has an excellent lineup of books, CDs, and DVDs that present God's Word with clarity and power. Our presenters include Jeffrey Rosario, James Rafferty, David Ashery, Ty Gibson, and more. We also maintain an archive of audio and video messages you can access free of charge. Feel free to listen online or download to your computer, tablet, or smartphone. Under Events, you'll discover locations and dates where ministry events will be held throughout the year. We'd love to see you. If you felt a personal call to ministry, our Arise School will help get you going. We have training programs that vary from 9 days to 13 weeks. Click on the Learn More link for more details about each program. Stay up to date with the latest sermons, media, news, and events by subscribing to our monthly newsletter. If you'd like to help us continue producing gospel resources, please donate using our convenient and secure webpage and receive a tax-deductible receipt. We're here to serve and equip you in sharing your passion for Christ and the global advancement of His benevolent kingdom. Lightbearers.org. There's room at the Lightbearers table for you.
There's some astounding stuff that comes to the surface in the first prophecy in Revelation, which is the prophecy of the 7 churches. Now, we've mentioned that there's a historic scope. We've pointed out that the 7 churches extend from the apostolic period, 1st century, straight through to the end of the world, to what is sometimes called the end time or the eschaton. So that's the period covered. But the deep stuff that we really want to bring to the surface is the pastoral stuff that's going on.
The content,
yeah. John is pastor, poet, and prophet, we've mentioned. Here we see that John is the channel for the pastoral ministry of Jesus himself. Jesus is the one who is said to be in the midst of the 7 candlesticks, which are symbolic for the 7 churches. He's there.
And that's sanctuary language.
That's sanctuary language from the Old Testament.
And that's verse 20.
Yeah. So let's just jump right into it. The 7 churches prophecy basically is chapters 2 and 3.
Well, I loved what you just said, Ty. You said that, and it was like you were making an astounding statement, but I think it's an instructive statement. I think that the book of Revelation is very instructive for us today. And you said that John is, I can't give all the emphasis that you gave, John is actually the instrument for the pastoral ministry of Jesus.
Yes.
I thought, well, so are we. I mean, that is what we are, right? Jesus, we are the body of Christ, and Jesus is the head, and we are to be the pastoral ministry for Jesus. I really like that because the book of Revelation is giving that that picture for us so that we can actually take that and say, wow.
Is that the 7 churches?
Yes.
The rise and fall of that attempt of the church trying to fill that role through history.
Well, that's a great perspective. I hadn't thought of that.
I wasn't thinking of that. You're bringing something else to the table now, and this is.
You go ahead, because I was just going to.
Well, I'll tell you why I think the pastoral element in the book of Revelation, and specifically the churches, is so important, is because it shows the personable dimension of God.
That's beautiful.
God's character, God's heart is on display here. It's not just a book that is filled with symbols to be interpreted and decoded. It's a book in which God is leaning in. Jesus is leaning in. He's taking people by the hand, by the arm, and he's saying,
knocking on the door.
Listen.
Yep.
I see what you don't. Let me explain to you where your dangers lie, and let me give you some remedies. Let me tell you how that you can flourish and thrive. There's the kind of conversations that we have with people we love.
Beautiful.
That we sit down with people and we say, listen, I don't know if you can bear. This happened to me just last night. I had the difficult task of sitting down with a young couple, one of which I've known since this person was a child and love her dearly, and I had to tell them some hard stuff. I didn't want to. In fact, I tried to talk myself out of it, but they set up the appointment, and we had to sit down, and I said, can you bear what I need to tell you? And they said, yeah, in fact, we're here because we need you to tell us. And they were so open to it. I think that that's the spirit we need to have with Jesus. You want to tell us some hard stuff? We know we need to hear it. But here's the thing. This girl looked into my eyes last night and she said, the reason why we wanted you is because I've known you a long time. There's a friendship there. And she said, I knew that you would tell us the hard stuff that we need to hear. And then she looked straight in my eyes. She said, but I've known you for a long time and I know you love me. And that's the powerful combination, isn't it?
That Christ
you
has.
see in Jesus. I'm going to tell you the truth, but I'm the one who's faithful and true to you. I'm the one who loves you. So I'm not telling you anything that will hurt that's not for your best good. And I'm not going to tell you anything that hurts that I don't have a remedy for.
And by the way, I know we're about to jump in the first church, but I love the fact that he begins with affirmation.
Yeah.
And then he goes into some instruction.
Right.
I love that fact, That's a beautiful thing.
Again, the book of Revelation is instructive.
Yeah.
It's pastoral, but it's instructing us. And I was grabbing these pictures because I wanted us to use them as an illustration of what. So in the book of Revelation, we see these different pictures, what we look like, what our strengths and weaknesses are. And as Jeffrey said, he always starts with the strengths, like this picture of Jeffrey specifically.
That's a strong picture.
Look at the strength.
I didn't even know that was Jeffrey.
Yeah, look at the strength in this picture, you know what I'm saying? And so we start with the strengths, but then we say, but Jeffrey, that's kind of scary too. I mean, you've got a strong, and that's what God does. He wants to emphasize the positive first, and then that makes us more receptive. And the first thing he emphasizes that I think is just incredible is the fact that he's just there. He's just with us, which we've already emphasized.
Never leave you.
And he's hanging out in the midst of
the
lampstand, of the churches. I love that too.
Each of we've mentioned the part about poet, John is a poet, and this really comes out in we've talked about the 7 cycles. You have the churches, and then you have the seals, and then you have the trumpets, etc. But each of the letters or the admonitions and encouragements to the 7 churches follow a pattern. The pattern of to the angel of the church, that they all start that way, and then the I know, the positive, the affirmation, transitioning if there is some point of rebuke or of condemnation. There are 2 churches that don't have that. And then closing with a to him that overcomes, and then he that has an ear, let him hear. Every one of them follows that basic pattern. So it's helpful for us to see that in each, to me this establishes that God has a consistent and really fair-minded way of interacting with people. He's not playing favorites.
Yeah.
He engages with these people, and then he engages with these people, and then he engages with these people in the same way.
One thing I want to add to that, David, that I found fascinating, and it's a recent discovery. You know how it is with the book of Revelation especially, but in the Bible, you read it for years and years and years, and then all of a sudden, something clicks and you're like, whoa, I never saw that before. Yeah. And there's something in the 7 churches that I never saw before. And that is that every single one of the 7 churches includes a promise that applies to the new heaven and the new earth. You're going to have a crown. You're going to sit with me in the throne. You're going to be a pillar in my temple. You're going to have a new name. You're going to have, every single one of the churches takes us all the way down past the second coming and the time of the 1,000-year judgment, all the way down and plants us right in the new heaven and the new earth.
That's beautiful.
And you see this as part of the cycle of the 7 churches, the 7 seals, the 7 trumpets, and of course the last section of Revelation.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So that means then, this is totally new to me, what you're just bringing. That means that not only do the 7 begin with the apostolic period, 1st century, and go all the way to the end. But in each one of them, it goes all the way to the end.
Each one of them ends with promises that have to pertain to the new heaven and the new earth. And each one of the cycles, each one of the cycles ends with that new heaven, new earth. You know, I used to read the book of Revelation. The reason why this is incredible to me is because I used to read the book of Revelation. I used to think, begins an apostolic age, ends with second coming. Begins an apostolic age, ends with second coming. Begins and then the last one ends with second coming, but gives us some more details that weren't in the last 3 cycles about the new heaven and the new earth. But no, each one of them, like let's say, for example, the seals. That's the next section. The seals has this turnout, if you will, where John has this pause in Revelation 7 about the 144,000 being sealed.
Kind of an interlude.
Yeah, an interlude. And then he has this great multitude picture, and that picture takes place in the new heaven and the new earth, where they walk beside the rivers of life. They don't hunger anymore. They don't thirst anymore. They walk with the Lamb, and he walks beside them. The sun doesn't light. All of this new heaven, new earth terminology is right there in the seals. It's in the trumpets also, which was amazing to me because it completes this picture of the cycle.
And I suppose the takeaway here is that God always has the best end in mind for everybody to whom he's speaking.
Yes.
Which, when you read some of the descriptions and his diagnosis of some of these churches, the fact that he could still have such a positive, optimistic, hopeful, love believes all things, hopes all things outlook, again, back to Ty's point, tells us a lot about the personability of God. As a bit of a confession here, I know that none of you are priests, but just allow me to confess here for a bit. For the longest time, I found the book of Revelation to be somewhat difficult because I felt like I was trying to decode almost like you try to crack
the Da Vinci Code.
Yeah, that kind of a thing, to where primarily what was going on was information. It's the transmission of information. And certainly there is that. God wants to communicate some data about the future, about the times in which we live. I get that. And we'll have ample time to discuss that. But it's really interesting when you take that sort of decoding view, rather than taking the more pastoral, poetic view, it can become very academic. Where now I know the truth, and I'm going to go tell others the truth, rather than, well, so what's the truth for me? Have I left my first love? Have I, you go down some of those itemizations that God has for the 7 churches, and if you deal with it academically, merely in its historical context, well, then we get screened.
Yeah.
But what if God is saying to you and to me, and as we read, hey, look, have you been eating things sacrificed to idols, or the equivalent, the modern equivalent of that, or whatever those points of rebuke might be? Got to take that on board, and not just the rebuke, but also the positive. What you're talking about here. Hey, I see the end. You're going to be a pillar in the temple. You're going to have a new name. So I love that idea that God, even when He's in the midst of rebuke, He sees the end.
Yes.
Go ahead,
And even
Jeffrey.
further than that, not only that God sees the end, but that in order for us to live satisfying lives, we have to live them in the context of the end.
And that's one of the reasons He shows it to us.
Yeah, so every single church, I love what you're saying, has that, traces us to the end. And I think the point there is that the individual has to orient themselves.
Yes.
You want to live a meaningful life. You want to have a great marriage. You want to be a great parent.
Compass north. True north.
Keep the compass on true north. And therefore, everything in your life takes that direction, you know.
Okay, just push the pause button right there. We have to take a break.
A Light in Zambia is a moving video documentary that traces the stories of 5 amazing African men and women who encountered Christ through the powerful medium of gospel literature. To receive your free copy, call 877-585-1111 or write to Light Bearers, 37457 Jasper Lowell Road, Jasper, Oregon 97438. Once again, to receive your free copy of A Light in Zambia, call 877-585-1111 or write to Light Bearers, 37457 Jasper Lowell Road, Jasper, Oregon 97438. Simply ask for the Zambia DVD.
Not only does the 7 churches prophecy reveal segments of history that are unfolding, but I think it's super interesting that we see Jesus, as we've mentioned, on pastoral display from which we can learn how to navigate our relationships. I mean, just look at the way He does it. Jesus is revealing defects and dysfunctions, but only in the context of love and acceptance and promise. What if we were to do all of our relationships like that? What if we were to enter into hard conversations with people we're close to by saying, listen, I want to tell you that you're incredible, and the amazing things that I've seen, and you are, and you have, and you're a blessing. Now, there's something I need to tell you. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Then you're in a context of acceptance and love. Jesus does that
That's the pattern.
over and over and over again. So in that context, people can bear. I can bear. If you guys ever have anything hard to tell me, you first need to begin by telling me how much you love me.
Biblical Psychology 101.
He loved us and washed us.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So let's get into the churches. What's going on? There's 7 of them. The first one is Ephesus. What's going on here?
For me, when I look at, just to highlight one thing that jumps out, at each of the churches I try to say, what's the major takeaway? And for me personally, when I look at the first church, the church of Ephesus, I see the big takeaway in verse 4. Nevertheless, this I have against you, that you have left your first love. That's the message for me, that's possible to be done. That you can be on fire, you can be enthusiastic, you can be all keyed up about the goodness, which certainly the apostolic church was.
Absolutely.
And which I was. When I first came into the faith, I feel like in most people that are converts to Christ, I'm saying, especially if they come from outside in, there is a zeal, there is a passion, there is a vigor.
Yeah.
And it's like somebody said to me not long after I was converted, hey, don't forget, this is a marathon, not a sprint. And I think a lot of people think that it's a sprint. They run, they tire out, and they're like, oh, that religion thing didn't work for me. They literally leave their first love, the thing they were passionate about, they burn out. And so the takeaway for me on this is, hey, remember from where you have fallen. And what I take that to mean is go back to that, what was the thing that originally captivated you in the beginning? Go back to where you last saw the light, the joy, the wonder, the enthusiasm of that connection.
So it's practical.
It's practical.
It's
And
practical. You know, the awesome thing here is I love the fact that I have this one thing against you. It has nothing to do with departing from right theology. It has nothing to do in any of those respects. The implication, it's possible to be perfectly clear on your theology. It's possible to be
Trying those that say they're apostles that are not.
Yes,
have
it's
faith and works
possible
and
to be a
patience.
regular student of the Bible. It's possible to regularly engage in prayer
on
and
fire.
still not have the love of God in your heart. Still be a jerk. Still be obnoxious, still be a misrepresentation of Jesus.
It's you've lost your first love. It's not you've lost your first doctrinal realization, or
That's it.
you lost your first powerful academic insight, or
That's it.
you forgot that verse you memorized.
That's it.
Not that any of that is insignificant, but you've lost your first love. You used to love me. You
And
used
you
to
used to love
me.
others.
And you used to love others. And you don't love me and you don't love others anymore the way you did when you first realized
And
it.
then verse 5, remember where you have fallen. So a lack of first love is considered a spiritual fall to Jesus.
Whoa,
That's
whoa.
powerful.
That is very powerful.
Yeah, because we think, what's a spiritual fall? Oh, I had a moral fall. And we think the worst of, we can imagine.
Adultery,
What does that
stolen
mean?
something,
But
thievery.
we never think, you know what?
I'm not nice to people.
I just don't have that same gentleness and sweetness about me anymore. According to Jesus, that's considered a spiritual fall,
Oh, wow.
which is heavy.
And the
know what?
takeaway on
Go
this,
ahead.
one
Go ahead, James.
takeaway on this for me, in relation to everything we've said, is the history is important. When you look at the history of the early church, this is something that happened gradually. It was not perceptible
There you
to
go.
them. They didn't perceive it happening. It happened over time. So it wasn't like one day they were on fire and the next day they woke up and they weren't on fire anymore. It was slowly weaning away. And I think so. Part of what I think losing the first love is, and this is what Oswald Chambers says. He says, the greatest enemy of our love for Christ are our works for Christ.
Wow.
So we come to Christ, first love, we have nothing on our hands to bring, simply to his cross we cling. We fall in love with him because we realize we're wretched sinners and we've never been righteous. We're skateboarding pop punks, whatever, pop rock punks, and we come to him and he just embraces us, he forgives us, he and then we're just like on fire. And then we start, doing this, and we start doing that, and we start paying this, and we start paying that, and that goes on for months, and then goes on for years, and pretty soon we get to the place where we don't quite feel like we're coming to Jesus with nothing in our hands. We've got a lot of stuff in our hands to bring.
It's good
That's
insight.
how we're losing our first love. And so then Christ, and sometimes it does happen through a fall, Christ reminds us, the beginning, finding out where it first started is remembering that your entire dependence was on me. It wasn't all that stuff that you're doing right here.
Preach.
And that first love ignites again.
Okay, what about the next one, church number 2, which is Smyrna in chapter 2, verses 8 through 11.
The thing that jumps out at me, if you don't mind, if I just dive in.
Dive in.
To me, I love verse 9. This idea that I know your works, tribulation, and poverty, and then I love this little parenthetical statement, but you are rich. This is one of the two churches of whom Jesus gives no constructive criticism or rebuke. It's all positive. And what I love about this is, look, what the world sees is not what I see. You don't have goods. You don't have the material. But Jesus is like,
Yeah.
let me be clear on this. You're rich,
Yeah.
which is fascinating because when Jesus comes to the last church, he's going to say, yeah, you think you're rich.
That is
But you're actually
fascinating.
poor.
Yeah.
Where this church, hey,
Yeah.
you might
Yeah.
appear to
You're
be poor,
but you're actually rich.
Not only are you poor,
That's the
but
best thing you've said all day.
but the Smyrna church is under tribulation, it says.
Yeah.
So this church is under persecution.
That's right.
There's some terrible stuff going down, and then Jesus says, "But you're rich." So wealth and riches is weighed and calculated on a different level
There you go.
than we tend to weigh and calculate riches. So in what sense are they rich? Well, they're rich in love for Jesus.
rich in the
They're rich in the
gospel.
gospel. They're rich in understanding, rich relationally.
They're rich in faith.
They're
James
rich in
says
faith.
rich in faith.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you look at the period, if we have the apostolic church in Ephesus, it was not long after that. You get into the 2nd and the 3rd centuries, particularly with the persecutions of Domitian, Diocletian, maybe Decian. I might have gotten that one wrong, but you have these periods of significant persecution in the 2nd and 3rd centuries where the church was really under the thumb of imperial Rome. And that, I think, is the very prophetic trajectory that's being defined here. Hey, a period of significant tribulation will come.
Yeah.
The 10 days is definitely Diocletian, 303 to 313.
Yeah.
So what about the next church? Because I think there's a contrast between the two. In the next church, in this church, you have people who are, afflicted and they seem poor, but they're rich in spiritual experience. But I think in the church of Pergamos, it completely switches because Pergamos means elevation. The church is being elevated from a worldly perspective.
Politically.
Yes, economically, they're being given favor because Constantine comes on the scene right after 313, right after Diocletian. Constantine comes on the scene. 321, Sunday law passed. The church becomes the main center and focus. Pagans come into the church by the thousands, and all of a sudden the church is elevated in the world.
Yeah.
It becomes rich in worldly wealth, in worldly status.
And Pergamos the Pergamos church, the third church, is acknowledged to be in a position in the world where, verse 13, where Satan's throne is. Now that's interesting language. So
That is
so
fascinating.
this isn't talking about a literal ornate chair somewhere that the devil in physical form is sitting on. This is essentially telling us that there is a way in which religion, and in this particular context, Christianity, which is becoming elevated politically, there is a sense in which religion can be the throne of Satan. Satan is actually working through and in religion, even in Christianity at different times in history.
Well, look at this contrast, okay? In the previous church, Church of Smyrna, notice how he points out here in verse 10, fear none of these things which thou shalt suffer. Behold, the devil, that's Satan, shall cast some of you into prison. Then you go to the next church, and that church is rich in spiritual things, but poor. Then you go to the next church, and what happens?
And
Throne of Satan.
The devil's
Satan's throne is now in the church, and the church, as an evidence
he
of
couldn't
that,
beat them, so he joined them.
yeah, and it's evidence that that has economic prosperity, political prosperity.
So
imperial
why are
church.
we, as quote-unquote Christians, up in arms when people who quote-unquote aren't Christians, unbelievers, level their criticism against historical Christianity? Shouldn't we be nodding our heads and saying
Absolutely.
amen?
Yeah.
Shouldn't we
Yeah.
be saying,
Of course we
listen,
should.
Satan actually
if
came
you're
in.
looking at the horrible, dastardly deeds of Christianity in history, we're not going to defend that. That was satanic in the name of Christ. That was satanic under the guise of Christianity. We should be aligning ourselves. I told somebody recently, came right out of my mouth, I had to explain, but I said, listen, according to what some people have represented Christ to be down through history, and according to what some people believe about God, God himself is an atheist. God himself doesn't believe in the God that has been forced on the world. We should be affirming unbelief where unbelief is totally legitimate.
Legitimate and admirable.
And that's verse 13. I know thy works and where thou dwellest, even where Satan's seat is, and thou holdest fast my name, my character. In other words, Satan's come in, but you're not denying my character.
Yeah.
Satan's coming into the church, and the church is misrepresenting the character of God, but you're not.
Is that still Pergamos?
That's still Pergamos.
Okay, yeah.
That's verse 13, right when it's happening. In other words, it seems as though the key thing to do in the context of of compromise with Christianity in the world is to hold fast to God's character and to keep revealing God's character. And I would say it this way, that is a theme that's going to take us all the way through the book of Revelation, that we would hold on to God's character and not compromise it politically or economically.
You threw those dates out real quick, James, but maybe just for our viewers who are not as familiar with church history, we should say that probably apart from the resurrection of Jesus, which is the singular most significant event to happen in church history, of course, without the resurrection there is no
Human
church.
history.
The conversion of Constantine at the beginning of the 4th century, AD 312, is probably the single most significant post-resurrection event to happen in church history. Because you go from the pre-Constantinian world, where it's a persecuted political minority. It's not even a political factor at all, and all of a sudden you are this grand, big political empire, or part of the political empire, and now there's political ambition and there's wealth ambition and all of this, and now we live in the post-Constantinian world. That's the world we live in.
Yes.
And so I love what you say there, Ty. When I have a lot of people say to me, I'm not really up on church. I don't like church. I know what they're saying. They're saying, I know about history, I know what churches have done, I know the way that churches can be, and you know what? My resonance with that is deep. I say, me neither. Because what they mean by church is not your humble, local, little happy Seventh Day Adventist or Baptist or Pentecostal church where everybody loves one another and things are great. When they're thinking, I'm down on church, much of what they're thinking is
historical Christianity.
I know what the church has done, and I don't want any part of it.
And I even feel
the good
like
news is Jesus doesn't want any part of it.
Exactly. And I even feel like the fact that of the dirty laundry of church history, I think that doesn't discredit the church in principle. I think that that just supports it, because we would say, as Bible students and as prophecy students, we're not surprised. This is not something that came out of left field. It was predicted that it would happen.
We're going to run out of time in about less than 5 minutes.
It gets
so what
worse.
about church number 4? Because there's a natural segue from what James was describing as Pergamos into Thyatira. What's going on there?
Well, it gets even worse, because now we've not only transitioned from the world persecuting the church to the world coming into the church, but now we've got the church itself persecuting the faithful. And Thyatira gives reference to Jezebel, that false prophetess. The reason why that reference is made is because the history of Ahab and Jezebel, who were followers of God, followers of the Lord, but false worshipers, persecuting God's prophets, persecuting God's people, persecuting Elijah.
It's in-house now.
Yeah, it's in-house.
It's not Romans external.
Right.
It's in-house.
My
that's
Bible
what's happening
actually
here.
has the heading there in chapter 2, verses 18 and onward for the Thyatira church. My heading is the corrupt church.
Yes. Exactly.
It's completely given over to evil. It is the instrument of the devil in the world, but it's called Christianity.
And the previous church was the compromising church. So at that stage, it's just flirting with it. And then by the time we get down there to Thyatira, now it's become the personification of it.
And then after the corrupt period, which is the 4th church, we go into the 5th church, which begins in chapter 3, verse 1. What's going on here? What is this period? And what's going on
here? The last
Sardis?
promise in the context of Thyatira was, to him that overcomes, I'm going to give the morning star. And John Wycliffe was considered the morning star of the Reformation. It's kind of leading us into this movement that is pulling some light out of the darkness. You've got Luther, you've got Wycliffe, you've got other reformers that come in and start bringing light and truth back to God's people.
Back into a church that was filled with darkness.
So what's the message
say for our
there?
viewer that AD 331, that's when Wycliffe is born. So now we're getting into what's called the Protestant period, right? The period,
what?
330.
1331.
1331.
I'm sorry, 1331. So you have a period there where there's a reformation now, a reforming of that original apostolic, an ember.
An
That's
ember
good.
that begins, that starts of
that little star there.
Yes.
So
spark.
That's the prophetic picture that you talked about. I think for us personally, we cannot divorce ourselves from the fact that religion can go bad. Religion is perishable. It's like food that's perishable. It can go bad, and not just historically, and not just with some other church, with us.
Now, another thing here that I think is important is that the message to Sardis is that I have not found your works perfect. And what I like about this is God is moving his people on. Don't stop there. Don't stop with Luther. Don't stop with Wycliffe. Don't stop with Wesley. Keep moving, because I've got a destiny for you. And I think that destiny is the next church, which is Philadelphia, the Church of Brotherly Love.
Yeah, Philadelphia actually means brotherly love, and now we're seeing historically the fruit of the Protestant Reformation in a church, the second of the two churches among the seven that has no criticism, no rebuke from Jesus. He essentially says, what's going on with this church is powerful and beautiful, and I have no correction to offer at all.
And then we go over the top with Laodicea, because Laodicea takes us right back into this comfortable, ease-loving, I'm rich, increased with goods and in need of nothing type of, and it's all going back to a relationship with Christ. The first church started with a relationship with Christ. The last church ends with a relationship with Christ. Christ is on the outside knocking. I want to get in, I want to get in, I want to get in.
That's in the Laodicean,
That's the Laodicean period.
Yeah. I think we're in the Laodicean period historically. Let's hope we're not in the Laodicean condition personally.
Amen. That's what
Amen.
I love the idea that the churches never give you the chance to feel at peace in the sense that, like, oh, we've arrived. It's always, and we could work on that, and we could work on that. But I love what you said, Ty, there at the outset. It's always in the context of love and of hope and of promise.
When Jesus comes to that final church, the Laodicean church, I think it's incredible, and we didn't mention a lot of the promises, but the promise to the Laodicean church is, hey, if you overcome your apathetic, ridiculously terrible religious condition, if you overcome this, you're going to be enthroned with me for all eternity. I'm going to give you a seat at the table, governing and running the universe with me if you overcome. And that is a very good note to close on.